Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. My name is Dara Miles Wilson. I am one of the co-chairs of the National Planning sorry, my dog, of the National Planning effort of Blackbirders Week. And I'm so happy to welcome you to Black on the Mic, Power of Communication. All right, and I'm so excited for this conversation today. I love podcasts. I listen to podcasts, and we have three very special guests who are podcasters, Black podcasters. That's not something you'll hear all the time. So first, I'd like to introduce Tenijah Hamilton, please. Tenijah, why don't you make yourself apparent, please, for the audience? Hello, yes.
Hello.
Hello. So this is Tenijah Hamilton, she, her pronouns. Tenijah Hamilton is a writer, executive, and creative producer, with a passion for using the transformative art of storytelling to instigate change. Since earning her bachelor's in mass communication, creative writing, and film and media studies in 2015, she has worked at the intersection of media and social impact everywhere from the Tribeca Film Institute to Nova on PBS, the longest running primetime science documentary series on American television. Since 2021, Tenijah has hosted and produced Bring Birds Back, a podcast about conservation, formal and citizen science, and of course, birds, told through the lenses of intersectionality and environmental justice. As the host of the show, Tenijah invites listeners to join her in appreciating the beauty and the mystery of birds all around us and to take action on their behalf. As Tenijah speaks with bird enthusiasts from across many different backgrounds, identities, and communities, listeners learn about the ways we all can work together to bring birds back. Tenijah is also the Chief Community Officer at Hopebound, an Atlanta-based organization providing free mental health support for youth and marginalized communities. Welcome, Tenijah. And Tenijah, could I please ask you, would you mind muting yourself? I think I hear a slight echo.
No worries.
Awesome, thank you. As much as I love the sound of my own voice, I don't need to hear it all the time. All right, next I'd like to invite on Tenijah James. Please, Tenijah, make yourself apparent, show yourself to the world. All right, so in true birding fashion. All right. Tenijah James has been a leader in the birding community for over a decade as an advocate for equitable access to the benefits of nature for all. From his first job as an environmental educator in his own neighborhood to his current role as lobbyist at a land conservation organization, Tenijah shares his passion for birds to build trust, coalition, and power to make a difference every day. And I'm sure we will hear so much more about Tenijah because I did not have a full bio to leave because Tenijah wants us to talk about it in the program. I hear that. No shame. All right. And he, him pronouns, and my pronouns are she, her. Apologies. Lastly, I'd like to introduce Will Valentine. Please, Will. Oh, hello there. Hi, how's it going? All right, so Will is currently living in Maine, having moved there from Seattle, Washington 2 years ago. Like a bird, he loves to travel and explore new places. Will has always had a drive to get back to his community, which has led him to a career with conservation-based nonprofits and now local government. He's been honored to help the lives of people and animals near him a little better through his work. He believes no matter where people are, there's beauty and there is a hope to find in our own backgrounds. Speaking of our own, backyards. Speaking of our own backyards, that spirit of wonder is the heart of his show, Will's Bird Brain, a podcast that encourages people to be kind to and appreciate the most common of U.S. birds. Every episode not only focuses on a specific bird, but also introduces a guest host to discuss another aspect of our culture and community, and how that theme relates to birding. The goal of his show is increasing the accessibility of birding. It can be daunting to begin birding. It seems expensive, too brainy, too niche of a community, required to travel, etc. His podcast dispels these common anxieties and shows new birders how amazing the hobby can be at any level. Welcome. Thank you so much, Will. So hello, everybody. Here we are, our full, beautiful, authentic selves. I'd like to, because this is just, we might as well. I want to hear first Sparkbird. We have to, very briefly. Tenijah, may I have your Sparkbird?
Yes. Oh boy. So a big part of my podcast, a big part of my experience is that I only really started birding and really noticing birds in the past couple of years, really at the start of the pandemic, where there was not much to do. You could only kind of be outside, all the things. And I was living in Boston at the time. And the first bird I remember being like, oh, that's a weird little guy, was a great blue heron who lived under a bridge on the Charles River. And he was just big, as somebody who again hadn't really wasn't really super cognizant of birds. It's like, why is he so big? And why is he in the water? And why does he have a stabby thing on his beak? And so I would say probably the great blue heron, who I would call him Herbert, and be like, hey Herbert. I think that was probably my spark bird.
All right. And in no particular order, Taiki or Will, please.
I'm alphabetical. My spark bird was the belted kingfisher. I was initially assigned it as a kind of like a book report when I was an environmental educator, and this was part of my training. And I looked it up in the Sibley and the Nat Geo and the Peterson guide and the Crosley guide, looked it up everywhere I could. And when I came to work the next week, I saw it like right before I came into the environmental center. And it was the first time that a book assignment basically came to life. And the opportunity to be present for something like that was so meaningful. It started, to let me see birding as a responsibility. To build trust, to build power, to build coalition in my community. And that's a moment that I hope I can share with a lot of people.
So my spark bird was none other than the bird of the week, the red-winged blackbird. So my whole life, I've really loved animals, but I never really cared about birds. I was like, oh, they're boring. They're always far away. Don't care. And then a few years ago, 2018, I believe it was, I was walking around Green Lake Park in Seattle, and I saw what I thought was a crow with red on its wings. So I was like, oh my gosh, I discovered like a new mutation of crow. Like, I'm going to be famous. It's so cool. And I was telling everybody I could find. And then I ran into a birder who was like, that's a red-winged blackbird, one of the most common birds in the United States. And it just kind of like changed my entire world perspective. And especially like kind of led to this passion that has led to the podcast, because how could this awesome bird be so like prevalent all around us? So the red-winged blackbird has really like made a nest in my heart, so to speak.
I like it. That was punny. Please, all the puns, all the wit. I love him, please, during this podcast. Also, that was a great segue onto, okay, yeah, so what even led to the start of your podcast, Will's Bird Brain? But I like to hear from all of you, like what was either the exact series of events that brought you to your journey or to your current place in your journey as a podcast host?
I'm happy to go first. It was real weird. It was nothing less than just the stars aligning in the perfect way, because being a podcaster was not something I anticipated. I was and I cannot express how very green and new I was to birding. And a lot of it was like, I don't know if this is a space for me, but it just so happened. This was, I think, 2020 when an opportunity kind of came to me through some colleagues. I was working in public media at the time. And I had a colleague who hosted a show with BirdNote, the organization, and he really encouraged me to just like take a try. Like, you're a new birder, and I understand that's scary, but this is an important perspective. And thinking back to where we all were in 2020, right? A lot of the conversations we were having, a lot of the reckonings that we were having were about who deserves to be where and how to take up space and how to be present and how to have our voices amplified in these spaces where people tell us we're not supposed to be. So I was kind of going through my own figuring that out. And it became okay, this is new, this is scary, but why can't I be here? Why can't I be here knowing absolutely 0% about birds at this point? But why not? Why can't I do that? And why can't I take an audience along on the journey? And so, yeah, the stars just aligned. The folks at BirdNote who produce and who created Bring Birds Back were really awesome collaborators. And yeah, we've been doing the show since 2021. So that's how it kind of came to me.
The origin story of my podcasting came from, it's like an origin story within an origin story. It is initially a start from the Urban Wildlife podcast that got started by a friend of mine in Philly. And then we were just like, oh, what if we had offshoots of a similar type of wildlife media network? And we created this Wildlife Observer Network that became this multi-platform media for wildlife. And I had my own podcast where I started On Word for Wildlife, where I discussed the intersections of wildlife conservation and politics. And we got started with that right before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic was at its peak, everybody was doing podcasts. Everybody was jumping into it. And, members of the team started having babies. I had a broken ankle. And some of the activity kind of fell off. And I've still dropped a couple episodes here and there. But now I've actually met somebody at a conference, the Taking Nature Black conference. I met somebody, Julian Nesbitt, and he's in Oakland, California. He and I have been working together, and we actually are starting a new podcast, kind of reviving from that wildlife media network idea. And that new podcast is called Wild Thoughts, where we discuss you'll see I like intersections here, the intersection of wildlife and pop culture. Because we're both big fans of Rihanna. And so we were like, Wild Thoughts, but then also Wild Thoughts, So if you have that little guitar riff in your head whenever I say that, I hope that there's a commercial-free version we can use. That would really help. If not, that's fine. That's fine. We'll still be creative. So I kind of had two origin stories wrapped into one. And the On Word for Wildlife will still continue. There's just now a more fun one.
Thanks for getting that stuck in my head for the rest of the day.
You're welcome.
Okay, so my podcast is pretty grassroots, I guess you could say. And I'm sure we'll discuss kind of more of this later, but mine started from my desire to build my own community. Because when I started birding, I was completely new, completely unknown. I didn't know anybody in that kind of world and had trouble kind of like fitting in. So I started meeting people online and in parks and stuff. And I found that people are really cool and they like to hear my perspectives and where I'm coming from, what I've learned. So just over the years, especially through Instagram, as I was posting photos of birds with fun facts and different sorts of scientific things about birds, I learned a lot about them. I'm definitely not a scientist in my professional career, but I have just kind of accumulated all of this birdie knowledge. So I can't help but just share it all the time. Kind of the faucet's open with the bird facts. So people have told me over however long that I should start a podcast just to kind of get all of that out there. And I always say, oh, no, leave that to the professionals. But then just kind of recently, especially towards the downturn of the pandemic, I was thinking maybe this is something I can do. So I looked into it, just the logistics of me as an individual creating something that I can put out into the world. And it took a little work, but I figured out how to do it. So I did, and I started engaging with other people that had things to say about birds or that birding community. And it's just kind of grown from there. So yeah, it just really started, I guess, in Will's Bird Brain, and now it's out for the world.
Thank you. And by the way, Taiki, no, I've heard your podcast before. I'd say that was fun. So no, it's all fun. Similar to like what I've been saying all week so I'm on the East Coast, whenever we have northern cardinals everywhere, to a point where they get boring. It's like, oh, it's a cardinal. They mean, oh, it's a cardinal. So like, no, it's all fun. Like, it's on you. This is all great. It's how you have to frame it that way. So I just want to put that out there. So yeah, so wait, Will, I want to pick up with you, since you're the best, it seems, at making these bridging points, really. Yeah, so I hear like community and like establishing that community, connecting. But did you hear anything, or did you not hear anything in the current podcasting world that maybe wanted you to contribute? Like what specifically unique perspective, what's going on in Will's bird brain that you just have to get out there that will get other people, really, as a science communicator, get other people to want to come on board?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I felt like I didn't find as much of in the podcasting world is the focus on things all around us, like the northern cardinal, like you mentioned, because they're just kind of common birds that you see all the time. So like, how special could they be? I've seen so many nature shows and podcasts and all of that where they talk about these exotic birds of paradise and like really cool things that like maybe some people never get to see. So as I was consuming that type of media, I'm like, man, I'd really like to see a king penguin or, a kiwi or something like that. But it just felt so foreign to me. So I wanted to create something for everybody in their own backyard to be awestruck by. The first episode of my podcast is about pigeons and why we should appreciate them. Because I really want people to understand that birding is for everybody, no matter where you are. And that's a really big part of Will's bird brain. I like to take walks, like on my lunch break or wherever, even just going to the bus stop. And I see so many birds, and it's like, these are really cool little creatures that can fly all over the world and be all these different places. So just because I see them every day or they're common birds doesn't mean that they're not worth our attention and appreciation.
And can I add, Will's podcast episodes, great names.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
How do you think of them?
A lot of them come from the discussion, but I also just like puns, if you can't tell.
Yeah. Gulls just want to have fun.
Oh, yeah. Gulls just want to have fun. Carry on, Wayward Vulture. A lot of music references. But the kind of structure of my podcast is always casual, because just coming back to me and what I kind of enjoy to listen to, I get a little overwhelmed when things are like too professional and structured and all of that. So like, I want people listening to be able to have fun and like listen to me like laughing and maybe like stumbling on my words every now and then, stuff like that. So whenever I am kind of doing this pre-meeting with the co-host for the episodes, I say like, just crack as many jokes as you want, relax, have fun. We'll go from there. So a lot of the bird names or the podcast names too, just come from us like joking around and having fun.
I was going to say there's something that Will is kind of hitting on that I think was really important for me, and definitely in the early beginning stages of thinking about birds for me, but even now. And I think it's just these kind of like common everyday birds and the idea of like accessibility. And one of the revelations that I had since her hosting Bring Birds Back is that you don't have to go anywhere or do anything really outside of observe birds. And you can do that from the comfort of your own home. You can do it from your front porch. You could do it from the car, safely in a passenger seat. You can do it from so many places. And that for me really changed the game, because it was kind of, birding for me was shrouded in this idea of like, okay, I need to go and do a 10-mile hike deep in the Amazon rainforest, and then I can only see this kind of bird. And like it had this kind of structure to it that made it inaccessible. So I love all this talk about kind of the common birds, because those are they are in our communities. They're our neighbors. They're the ones that we like share actual space with. And I have a pair of northern cardinals who live in the dogwood tree or not live, but they visit the dogwood tree very often outside my front door. And I name them, and I keep up with them. They like to play, and and it's just so nice to like establish a relationship with nature in that very interpersonal way. So I really related to that, Will.
It's funny you mentioned that. I feel like I've been called out so many times this week because I first started birding. Like, I'm that example where it's like, you don't have to go out to an exotic place and do it. Yeah, that was when like literally my entryway into birding. So that's what I thought at first. Like, oh yeah, I gotta go. So, but that myth, that's a myth. It's been disproven time and time again. But I really appreciate hearing that. But to that point though, also why I thought that at the time was because there weren't podcasts like this currently. Like, there's not a bunch of stuff that I'm receiving. There's not a bunch of media that's pushing that's really pushing that narrative that no, just go outside your door, look outside your window. All right. So I really appreciated that. But more on narratives though. Like, so that's one narrative that I've definitely like I know now. And I really appreciate hearing, because that's like what really gets people out there and engaging with science and engaging with the nature. What are other narratives that you all specifically are trying to push either in your podcast or either in your work, either policy work? I mean, like liberation, like Black liberation. Like, what are you trying to emphasize to your audience? Because you have a platform, you have a pulpit. What are you telling them?
I'll go first. So a really huge part of Will's Bird Brain Tune, and the reason I kind of started it was I didn't discover the hobby of birding until my mid-20s. And like I mentioned, I've loved animals my whole life. So I felt almost robbed. It's like, how did I never even hear this word birding until, I went and found the word myself after the crow with red wings. So a huge part, like motivating factor for me with the podcast is birding should be accessible at all levels, no matter what your interest is or whatever. Like, birds are connected to every aspect of our world and our culture. So with every episode of my show, I bring on somebody else that has some sort of niche expertise. So the Gulls Just Want to Have Fun episode Tyke mentioned, I had a professional from the museum studies world talk about how we document birds in our history in museums and things like that. In the pigeon episode, that was the first one. So it introduces the theme of everybody's a birder. And I brought on somebody that had never been birding before, just to experience like what it's like, as a brand new birder. So I really want to convey that you don't have to have this like deep knowledge of birding. And you can just pick up anywhere. It relates to everything that you like: movies, music, art, stuff like that. And it doesn't have to be this generational hobby. A lot of birders that I talk to, especially out in the field, say like, oh yeah, my grandpa had bird feeders, or my grandma was a birder and my parents love it. And that's how they're introduced to it. Well, I didn't have that. Like, nobody on my family cared about birds, whatever. So if I can kind of be that gap bridger for people who didn't have family members or like close friends that could have introduced them to the wonderful world of birding, then I think that's a success.
This is open to Tenijah or Tyke if you'd like to, or we can move on.
Well, I like the idea of getting more Black and brown folks, their voice involved in politics. Politics is something that in its own world has made a great effect at excluding people. So, it is not one podcast or one episode that's going to outright undo all of the history of exclusion, but I'm glad that I can be part of the work to undo it. And research. I'm very interested in how people explain their research. I try to find my scientific communicators and give them these opportunities to share a platform and amplify each other, because heck, you did all this great work trying to answer this really important question. Let's do what we can to amplify the answer out there.
Yeah. And for me, I think there are multiple answers to that question, but something I'm really passionate about and something that feels like a theme through the show is helping people to recognize that we kind of have this communal relationship with nature and with birds, and they tell us things, really important information about where we live and the health of our communities and the health of our ecosystem. And so it's been really cool to think about the ways we've been able to introduce kind of these science aspects and talk to academics and researchers, but also talk to citizen scientists who are observing and noting things down and, kind of being the keeper of information for their communities and evangelizing it on their platforms. Like, that is, I think, so important. And it's so empowering to be able to take that information that you learn and say, I know a little bit more about like where I am. And birds are so cool because they really are an indicator species. Like, they indicate so much. And so that's been kind of definitely something we've baked into the podcast, making sure that we are, I think, illuminating what is already there. And what's already there is this like really interesting, dynamic relationship with nature.
And can I add too, when I listened to the recent Bring Birds Back episode with you and Karina, it just felt like I was in the room with y'all, and I'm over here talking as if I'm gonna get my 2 cents in or laughing like y'all could hear me. There's something special with the way you do it when you bring folks together. I just wanted to say that.
That's very kind, Taiki. And I've had Taiki on the show before, and it's that has been one of, if not the greatest joys of being able to have this platform, have this show, and do this work, is you meet people who, I probably would have never met y'all if it wasn't for this, but also these are some of like the brightest, most innovative, fun people that you get, the privilege to spend time with. And then you build relationships and rapport, and then you get to bring them on your podcast and you get to talk to them. And that's such an invigorating experience. And I felt the same thing when, I had you on the podcast. Like, it's so fun. And I want people to feel like they're in the room and that they have a vested stake in what we're talking about. And we could just chat it up. It doesn't have to be super highbrow, over your head Latin names for birds. I don't know nobody's Latin name, but I could tell you what I do know. I'm learning. We're learning together. So.
Solid. Thank you. That was a really great exchange. Thank you. I love that. Like, I love when you can hear something, you're listening, and it feels like you're right there with it, even though you're just listening. But that being said, like, sometimes I feel, not even sometimes, a lot of times I'm very visual. I'm very curious what prompted, especially you, Tenijah, since you mentioned like broadcast background, why podcasting? Like, why a microphone? Why not a camera and a microphone? Like, why? I imagine like podcasting is just one less thing to worry about, just audio versus audio and video. But still, did you all find yourselves weighing out the options, or could you speak to that?
Well, on the original baking of the Wildlife Observer Network, we would record the podcast over Zoom. And we're like, well, we want to use the video while we're recording because we have personality. And, for some of the different shows, it's just helpful to do that. And then we're like, oh, why don't we just put it on YouTube? Why don't we just have like basically a video podcast? And then we were like, oh, that's a lot of work because we couldn't find a platform that could best edit 2 audio tracks and now 2 video tracks. So basically editing 4 different things, making sure they all sync up. That's that was in my beginning stages, and even now just a lot more sophisticated than I had time for. But with the new show that I'm working on with Julian Nesbitt, Wild Thoughts, I'm very open to figuring out what's good audio quality, what's good video quality, because people on the scrolling That's a good audience. And sometimes if you can just scroll a really good a clip, you know, and you're like, oh, let me check out this podcast. Let me see what's going on, you know, and it can often be very topical too. I mean, the first time I know that Sam Desjardins, she couldn't join us, but Always Be Burdened, big fan of that podcast. She dropped an episode right after National Audubon Society, after the workers at the National Audubon Society unionized. Or actually, no, I think, or something else racist happened at the organization. I was there, and when she dropped that episode, I shared that with the staff, and it just came from scrolling. So it's definitely a question of like, how do we get our stuff out there, whether it's video or audio, in a timely fashion, and figuring out how to do that from starting on a Zoom or something like this. I mean, I'm really a big fan of StreamYard now. Starting from this and then getting it out there, it was just so many steps to do and not a lot of time.
I actually have a question for my fellow panelists. I wonder how y'all contend with the idea of being in this space, like being in this media space, and as we're talking about, like, will you pivot to video and occupying the space and your profile rising higher and higher and dealing with kind of inherent anti-Blackness in a lot of these spaces. And I guess my idea is, you know, it's really hard to be a visible Black person who does work where there, you know, ostensibly aren't as many Black people. And I'm curious, have y'all thought about this as you thought about, you know, what the long shelf life of your podcast will be, or how you want to kind of, you know, use this for your personal career? I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. I have thought about that a little bit. And that's one of the reasons I was drawn to podcasting in the first place. I, especially in the past few years, have kind of seen this like renaissance of Black birders, like so many people on social media. Yeah, Black Birders Week. And it has given me this like kind of renewed passion for getting myself out there and like believing in myself as a Black birder. But something that has always been there for me is like birding is for Black people, white people, everybody. Mm-hmm. So with the podcast, it's like that kind of transcends like any sorts of like kind of physical identifier, I guess, kind of like what you're saying. So that's the spirit of my show. It's like birding is for everyone, and I want to show you how it integrates into all aspects of our lives. So I just feel like podcasting is a really great way to kind of disconnect from other kind of assumptions that we might make about people. I have had some really uncomfortable experiences just kind of in the field that I can't help but believe are because of like my race, what I look like, a young person of color, you know. So it's really nice to have never felt like that on the show, or even talking to people that have listened. So yeah, I love that question. And then just while I'm unmuted, I'll kind of quickly answer the other question too. Like I mentioned, my show is just like totally from the ground up from me. So when it first started, I'm like, I think I can figure out how to do a podcast. I don't think I can figure out how to do video editing and all this stuff. And like, the podcasting alone is pretty expensive. So like adding another element, I was overwhelmed. But I've really enjoyed learning and like teaching myself how to do the podcast. And then I supplement every episode with information on social media. So I have been making reels on Instagram that usually incorporate some aspect of the episode into a visual way. So again, to go back to the goals, just want to have fun episode, since it's on my mind. I made a video about how gulls have been observed to stamp their feet on the ground to simulate rain or other things like that to draw worms up, and then they eat the worms. And it looks like a little dance. So we talked about that on the show, and then I did the dance. It was pretty embarrassing, but I filmed that, recorded. I was on the beach. I had the Cyndi Lauper song playing, and yeah. So like I like what Taiki was saying too about like that kind of scrolling aspect of engagement. So I wanted to tap into that, but also relate it back to the show and what we're talking about on Will's birthday.
White journalists have given me the most issue, but white journalists aren't invited on my podcast. So it's, I'm somebody who wants to share political news, and so I want to be a reliable source for political news on wildlife conservation. But among the white journalist community, and there's one group I can think of in particular, I don't want to give them a platform to even say their name, that they don't see what I'm doing as objective journalism. And what is objective journalism? Like if you're an environmental journalist, you're not objective. You definitely have an angle, and that environmental part kind of speaks to that, because if you're an environmental journalist, you're not writing about new opportunities for oil and gas development in public lands. For some reason, you're not. For some reason, you're writing about how emissions affect public health effects, how loss of habitat affect animals, which then affect or can affect sacred sites for indigenous folks. So, environmental journalist, being an exclusive title that white journalists have definitely kept me out of a certain space. But I've always thought of each episode of my podcast for a particular audience. And so it won't be completely universal, but it's definitely something where I hope, the folks that want to share that space for political conversation or share their research, they can take this episode and say, hey, look at what I did. I did this episode over here. This is part of my portfolio of public engagement on this topic. And so I hope that it really supports them, and it's not something necessarily that every person in the world can consume. That being said, I've never had a huge goal in, becoming viral or super popular with this podcast. It was just like, hey, this is a fun idea. I don't see anybody else kind of doing this, and I have a lot of political news to share. But I need to find time to publish some of these episodes. So that's why I'm glad I'm working with Julian Nesbitt on the new episode, on the new show, Wild Thoughts. New energy, wild energy. And actually, Tenijah, I asked you the same question.
Yeah, so the idea of a growing profile, what that means, kind of reconciling in this space, it's something I'm thinking more about. I think initially it became, Bring Birds Back was an opportunity that came to me kind of, it was already the idea that it would be in podcast form. And that really worked for me because though I never hosted anything in this capacity before, I'm an auditory learner. I've always been really driven to audio-based things. I'm a big music head. Like I just absorb information better when I hear it. So when I see it. And so it was something that drew me. And thinking about video and like, do we fit the video? And then, all these things. Do I have like a public Instagram profile? And do I make reels and do all of these things? It's a hard one. There's a big part of me that's like, yes, I super see the value and I love our listeners. I love the community. Obviously the Black Birders community, all those things are so dope. And there's still a part of me that's like, it is also a level of exposure in a world that is just, not kind sometimes, not kind to Black folks, not kind to women, not kind to Black women. And then the list goes on. And so it's like, how do you balance those things? And so the answer I have is I'm still kind of figuring it out, but I am deeply and endlessly kind of inspired watching my peers navigate it. Looking at their choices and asking them these questions, like I'm asking y'all, and being able to hear what they say, because it all kind of helps to form a bigger picture. But I just, I want to be able to reach my people always, to keep that at the core and, get creative about what that looks like 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line,
Thank you so much, Tenijah, for asking that question and for driving such a really good discussion just now. I really appreciate it. It's why you are a host. It's why you're a podcast host. You're good at this. So we have, I just want to say briefly, thank you everybody who is watching this from wherever you are. We're hosting this on many, many different platforms because we want to, in the spirit of broadcasting widely, we really want to make sure that this is broadcast widely. And we want people to see this. We want people to hear, because I truly do feel that every one of my guests offers so much, and there's so much value in their wisdom, your leadership, your courage, really, because I think it's pretty courageous what you're doing. Do you have, that said, do you have any bits of advice to impart on anybody who is maybe even thinking about podcasts, or even thinking about becoming, as Tenijah, like a bit more prolific in their own world and putting themselves out a bit more? Do you have any bits of advice that you can give to our audience members who want to make a greater impact in their communication?
Yes. And my first bit of advice is, I feel like we hear very often the podcast market is super oversaturated and everybody has a podcast and all these things. And that may be true, but you don't. And I think it comes from a scarcity mindset, this idea that only some of us can do these things and only some of us can have space. And it's fear-based, and I don't think it's right. So, but what I would tell somebody is, like, if you have that yearning, if you have that desire, if you just want to experiment, go ahead. Like, there is something for everybody. And Dara, you started by saying you're a big podcast listener. I'm sure you know the variety is off the charts of like what there is to listen to, and your content will find somebody. And even if it doesn't, you never know what the process is going to teach you. So yeah, that's my advice. Like, if you've heard that about how the podcast market, there are too many podcasts and everybody has a podcast and yada, 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 that's fair. It's not necessarily wrong, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. So that'll be my advice.
My quick advice is content is more valuable than equipment. Equipment is more valuable than marketing, and marketing is more valuable than sponsorships. And when I say value, I mean like the time that you put into building it. Like the time that you put into building your content weighs a lot more than you figuring out what's the equipment that you need. When you have solid content, you're just like, okay, cool, I know what I'm doing here. And then maybe you're ready for equipment. You know, maybe you're like, oh, I want some headphones. You know, I want a little podcast mic. I want a little podcast. I want to be comfortable while I'm making this content. And then when you get into marketing, marketing is truly ultimately about the story of self, story of your show, story of you, story of your journey. And that's important to do that before sponsorships, because the world of sponsorships is give and take, come and go, dime a dozen. You know, there's a lot of idioms, but, you know, that cannot be the thing that comes first. And, you know, this isn't a place where you can make a lot of money unless, you know, you're on the you know, you have a production team side, and then they can swing together some things. And I don't even know how that money works, but it starts with the content. It starts with putting the most investment and the most value into what you make of what you want to say.
Yeah, and I would piggyback or birdie back or whatnot off what both Tenijah and Taiki have said. And just my kind of advice for everybody would be to not give up. I have felt like giving up so many times throughout my entire birding journey. When I first started birding, and like people wouldn't even talk to me when I was out there, or going on Facebook and seeing people like belittle other people for misidentifying really confusing species. It was like discouraging. So just kind of having the perseverance and trust in your own passion can go a really far way. With my podcast, I procrastinated for a long time after I told myself I was going to do it, just because it's like, oh, now I have to learn all these different things like video or sound editing, audio, whatever. I have to figure out how to talk to people, sometimes all over the country, and record it and do all this stuff. So just if you are truly passionate about what you're talking about, like the content or whatnot, then the other things, I believe, will fall into place. One of the challenges for me is kind of the money aspect of it too, because, you know, I got the drive, half the passion, but the equipment is expensive. It's like even just subscriptions to keep things going is expensive. But I truly believe like I care about what I have to say to the world, and it's worth that. So if you are passionate, don't let the other kind of noise get in the way. You can do it. You can learn too. It's like, sorry, one more thing. With like birding, I was overwhelmed by the scope of the hobby. It's like, okay, I think I just have to learn like the difference between a duck and a robin, maybe. But it turns out there's like a billion different duck species alone. So that was like, wow, how do I learn all this stuff? But as you do it, just ease into it and like have fun, enjoy what you're doing. So same with podcasting, just ease into it one thing at a time and don't give up.
Thank you. And excuse me. And as I'm looking at the clock, I want to remind the audience, we started, I want to say about 11 or 15 or so minutes late. So we'll be going on past 2 o'clock to about like 2:15 or so. So we have about 15 minutes. That being said, if you have a comment, if you have a question, if you just want to say hi, if you are someone's mom, like my mom likes to tune into all these things and say hi in the chat, please go ahead and say hi to the chat. I love saying hi to moms. What's up, moms? So yes, but please engage with us. We love engaging back. And also you can ask the panelists your questions. So yes, want to throw that out there. All right. Yes, Tyke.
Yeah. I was gonna say I have a question for panelists, and I don't know what freedom everybody has here to discuss, but so far I shared something upcoming. Can we hear something that's upcoming from Bring Birds Back and Will's Bird Brain?
Yeah. Oh boy. So Bring Birds Back season 4 just premiered in May. Super exciting. Thank you for the snaps. It's a season I'm really proud of, not the least of which because it was a big labor of love. I think we're more audacious this season than we've been before, and it took a lot of work on the back end from a really hardworking team. So preface to say that. And there are a couple of episodes I'm so excited about. I actually had probably one of the most transformative experiences of my life in that recently, and you'll hear it kind of closer to the end of the season, but we took a trip where we spoke to folks who are currently incarcerated, who work on sustainability projects around kind of keeping endangered populations thriving. And it's just so much to unpack in so many different ways. It challenged me at things I think about prison abolition and things I think about science and the government, all these things. But it was such a beautiful time getting to see these people, these incarcerated folks who were really having this experience of doing something really profound for a species, and how that really grounded them and how that gave them something to look forward to. And so those are episodes. It's going to be a 2-parter that comes out closer to the end of the season. And I'm just so grateful for that experience. And I hope everybody listens. We also, just this season is an embarrassment of riches. We got to spend some time with Bill McKibben, who's an environmentalist, one of the premier, he's an OG, been doing this for a very long time. So we have Bill McKibben on the show. He invited me to tap maple trees in Vermont. I haven't done it yet, but I will be making my way up to Vermont to tap maple trees with Bill McKibben. Best believe. So yeah, I'm just so excited. Thanks for asking, Tyke.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah, that's really cool. My season 2 of my show just released a couple of weeks ago. Thank you. So I've got some more really awesome common bird episodes coming up. The next one is about the house sparrow, which is a bit of a divisive bird. But the co-theme of that is DIY and sustainability on a small scale. So I was glad that you mentioned the sustainability aspect and how birds relate to that. So yeah, I've got some really interesting stuff coming up. House sparrows, American robins will be discussed, and their relationship to creating songs and how we do that, how we share our history and culture through song, and how robins pass down their song as well. So yeah, lots of good bird brain content coming up.
Wonderful. And fun fact about house sparrows. So I'm based out of DC, the traditional lands of the Nakatank peoples and Anacostia, and I get to bird on Capitol Hill. In fact, I have a bird walk tomorrow on the Hill with congressional staff, and so we see house sparrows, but we also see a subspecies called the Senate sparrow, and there's about 100 of those. Just kidding, it's not true. It's not true.
I knew that was coming. You told that joke on my podcast.
I'm like, I don't want to disregard what you're saying, but I've never
I
heard
could
it
tell you
say.
saw it coming. I could tell. As soon as I got started, you were like, "Here he go." And I was like, "I can't look at you." I
Sounded
don't
too
like this
professional.
glare. Will was
I don't know if y'all
leaning
saw me.
forward. He was like, "Oh, what?"
I was, yeah. Okay, here's
I
the
was like,
thing.
I knew it. I already
I
know. I
like-
was like, wait a minute, I know.
That's what I'm saying. My audience isn't big. My audience was just Will, and then whoever else liked the joke. But
Yeah. Like, okay, I like the joke. This is a good one. But just to relate it back to this whole conversation, I have had so many instances in the field where I'm like, that is a so-and-so thing. I'm positive that this species is X, Y, and Z. And people have been like, no, it's not. And then they'll ask somebody else and they'll say, yeah, it is that. And they're like, yes, it is. So it's like, I never, ever want to just disregard people and be like, I've never heard of the Senate bird, so it must not exist. Like, no, like it was a good joke, but I have like a soft spot for like people sharing that kind of stuff.
sorry for taking advantage of your generosity.
No worries.
I have a couple more jokes exactly like that.
This is a safe space from Tyke's jokes. All right.
Yeah.
Try the
Or
pun next
actually,
time.
for his jokes as well,
Yeah.
from them and for them. So, but thank you, Tyke, for that. All right, so all right, so I know, especially after because I really wanted to hear this I might have thought about dabbling in a podcast or something. Or gonna be honest again, I'm the bad side of the example that we're using. Like I've tried to do all the things because I have video cameras and stuff. So it's like, let me just YouTube, it's easy. It's not. So I want to hear what equipment you all are using. I think Techie might have started this convo earlier. We didn't finish, but what does your setup look like? Microphone? Are you dual monitoring? What is a stream deck? Like are y'all using those things? What does this look like for you all?
So I like this question, and it's one that I've answered a lot in helping other folks start their own podcasts. There's a podcast not related to birding, but I love the podcast so much. I was like one of the brain children behind it. It was called Virginia's for Voters. And this is the document that I sent them. I mean, you can't see the document, but it has all of the equipment that I use. So I use a Blue Yeti microphone. And if you Google best podcast microphone to use at medium budget, that's the one that comes up. I used to use an isolation shield, which is, let's say that this is the microphone, this is a shield. So it provides a thing, and singers typically use it. And I've been using that for voiceovers because sometimes I do really dramatic voiceovers for other things. I don't know what a stream deck is, but I use Alphonic, AUPHONIC, Alphonic, as a processing for my audio. You got to pay for that. And I used to use Anchor to host that would create the RSS feed. So an RSS feed is basically your internet address for your podcast. We're not a radio show, so we don't have an FM address. We're an internet thing. And so we have an internet address. And Anchor, I used to do commercials for Anchor. One of the easiest ways to make podcasts, available on all major platforms, and it provides a free, if not a little corny, sound effects and music that you can just throw into transitions and different things in your podcast. And I've been able to use that to, help find my own voice, help create my own voice in all of this. And as freewheeling as I think I give off as an impression, I have like my podcast is like structured. I have boxes, intro to this time, use this word to transition to this word. There's a lot of color coordination, and it becomes probably more work than it's worth to just explain something over 20 minutes. But Google Docs and Google Excel has been really helpful for me to organize my thoughts. But I've never been able to write down a joke. I'm always like, I know I'm going to say a joke in between these things. I don't know what the joke is, but I know it'll just come to me. And I've never been able to actually write down any joke. They just happen. That's a blessing and a curse, because if I'm not recording and the joke happens and then I'm like, wait, what did I say? I can't fake it,
Speaking of jokes again, I mentioned most of my jokes are like on the fly. It pains me so much as a podcast host when my guest doesn't laugh at my jokes. Like, come on. And then I have to like listen to it back and like hear them not laugh. I'm like, oh.
You can't add a laugh track? Just do it.
No, I can't do it. It's got to be natural. Like I'll just very quickly, we're talking about Canada geese. And I said something like, it's Canada geese, not Canadian geese, because they haven't been able to get their citizenship yet. And she just stared at me. I was like, that was a joke, because people call them Canadian geese. But gosh.
Oh man, that's tough.
Swing and a miss. But
anyway, I'll also answer the. Was I interrupting somebody?
Oh no, I was just saying I understood, but please, yes, go ahead.
So the equipment question. I also use the Blue Yeti microphone, which I like a lot. I got it as a gift, so that's really cool. I also use a Microsoft Surface that I've had for years and years to kind of be my editing hub. So my show is pretty mobile. I like to go to people and interact with them face to face if I can, because a lot of the point of Will's Bird Brain is like building that community, showing people that it's for everybody. So that has kind of brought on its own challenges, especially when it comes to like audio quality. When I'm like moving around this little surface and like microphone into like different types of rooms and all of that, it poses a challenge. But yeah, I mostly use that. And then I subscribe to some sound, like music and sound effects services online. There is something that I use called Buzzsprout. It's like a directory, whatchamacallit, for podcasts. So that's how I get them onto like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all of that. That makes it easier. Audacity, you might have heard of that one. Really great free program for sound editing, audio editing. So yeah, a lot of my stuff is like, I try and keep it as like inexpensive as possible while not sacrificing too much quality. But yeah, I like to be on the move, talk to people in different places. Like when I had the turkey vulture discussion, that was at the Maine Maritime Museum with their director of education. And I actually went into the museum to do the conversation. So it was cool to have this like different layer of depth for just me, mainly because, the people listening aren't in the museum. But it's like, it sounded like I was in a conference room because I was. So I did some sound effects. Like, okay, guys, we're walking in. And then, yeah.
So for a mic, I use a Shure mic, and SDHURE, I think, Shure. And I have a little tripod thingy, and I have pop filter over it. Easy peasy as far as like my equipment. I put it on my desk, which is also my work desk. No dual monitor. I use kind of my computer screen, and if I'm it just depends. Like if I'm doing an interview, it'll usually be, my screen will be half person, half questions, or and then we're kind of in a Zoom call. But I record my narration through QuickTime and do just a QuickTime audio recording. So using my external mic, I do that. I send it. And I guess what is a little different in, I guess, this scenario is Bring Birds Back has a production team. So they will take the raw audio and make me sound way smarter and way quicker, faster, better than I actually am. Because I'm the queen of and fun behind the scenes fact. Every time I get on the mic, no matter what time of day it is, no matter what's happening, I yawn first. And I think it's kind of like a nervous tick. And so, Lord, the amount of yawns they've had and just like mouth they've had to edit out, just it makes me shudder to think. But yeah, so there's a production team who supports the show, who then goes and like takes the audio. I know we kind of like script collaboratively in different stages of production, and then they work with Descript software to kind of mix and match selects and kind of get a final version. So yes, but as far as like what I use a microphone. Like I said, I use a Shure mic and a pop filter. Good to go, and good old QuickTime.
Wow, so I really am doing the most with my huge setup, my microphones I'm not using, my stands and stuff. Of course, yeah, because I'm not using them because like I don't like I have a like what I'm just looking at the stuff just like, man, what do I ought to sell this or I ought to give it to y'all. Like this is because I don't need it.
Or you could be a producer. You could be a producer for a show.
I could. You know what? Actually, Dagnabbit, you're right. You're right, actually, because that's the one thing I've definitely heard from all of you is how podcasting has you may have not explicitly said it, but I can hear it in your answers. I feel like it's given you a sense of confidence, and really it's really grounded you in your identity and who you are yourself, or at least it's helped you get there. And I love that. I really do love hearing that. We are pretty much at an hour. I don't want to, for the audience members, I don't want to drag their day out. For me, where I am, it's a really great day. So when you get people outside birding, are there any parting thoughts that you all would like to leave with the audience?
I would just say my parting thought leaving this is just I'm just so happy that this exists, that Black Birders Week exists through the hard work of a lot of people, because it's such an affirming time, an affirming space, and it says you can be here, you can be present, and you can do this thing, and you can build community. And so I'm just sitting in a lot of gratitude right now. I'm grateful to be here with y'all to talk with you. So yeah, just grateful, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I of course echo that as well. My parting thoughts would be just talk to somebody in your life about birding. Don't make any assumptions about people or what they may enjoy, and figure out a way to engage with people about birding in a way that they would be comfortable engaging with it. If you have a buddy that doesn't like birds, but they're a huge movie buff, you could talk about birds in movies, The Birds and Secret of Nim has a crow in it, things like that. So I'd say just be as passionate as you can about birding, and especially with our fellow birders of color. Let them know that you see them and you appreciate having them around, because sometimes just being able to talk to you guys or see you online, I'm like, yeah, I do belong here. So just be as open with birding as you can.
Puns are fun, but it's not the only way to do it. What y'all said was so profound. I really don't have much more to add than that. Listen to season 4 of Bring Birds Back. Listen to season 2 of Will's Bird Brain, and look out for Wild Thoughts whenever we're ready.
All right. Thank you all so very much. Thank you, Tenijah. Thank you, Tyke. Thank you, Will. I see all of you. I hear all of you, and I value everything that you have shared with us. And I also, just because I see her in the chat, and this was applicable to our conversation, but this is applicable to so much more. This is Nicole Jackson, one of the co-chairs of the National Planning Committee. She says, "Stay true to your why, and everything will fall else into place." Profoundly stated, Nicole. Thank you so much. Thank you for your ever persistent wisdom. So everybody, my name is Dara Miles Wilson. I too am a co-chair of the national planning effort, and I am grateful. I'm full of gratitude. I have so many bird photos to edit. I want to get back to that, and I want you all to have a great rest of your week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please continue birding. We are Black and Fun in STEM.